Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and after last week's video where we discussed Darker Image number 1, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at all of the first issues of the comics which featured the characters who started out in Darker Image number 1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. So I've decided to start out by talking about Blood Wulf number 1, which, as I stated in my Darker Image video, was the least successful book of the three characters who were introduced in Darker Image. There's probably a lot of reasons for this, but the two most notable that I can think of are, as I stated in my Darker Image video, Blood Wulf really is just kind of an imitation of Lobo, which, again, Rob never tried to hide. As we can see, Lobo is hanging dead in the background of the front cover of Blood Wulf number 1. However, I should also bring up that Darker Image came out in March of 1993. The Max came out later that same month with its first issue, and Deathblow's first issue came out in May of 1993. However, Rob Liefeld, for whatever reason, didn't introduce the first issue of Blood Wulf, which this is just a mini-series, this isn't even the main series, until February of 1995. It's literally almost 2 years later, so whatever steam he might have been able to build up by introducing Blood Wulf with Darker Image was completely gone by the point that this book actually launched. It's really kind of shocking that he would have put it on the back burner for almost 2 years, and I'm not surprised at all that it struggled to gain a following. Writer, Andy Mangels. Artist, Derek Gross Jr. Colorist, Gloria Vasquez. Color separations, in color. Lettering, Kurt Hathaway. Editor, Eric Stevenson. Associate Editor, Kurt Hathaway. Editorial Assistants, Nicole Vitz. Blood Wulf created by Rob Liefeld. As we can see here on the first page, there is a small spaceship being chased by a much larger spaceship, along with some starfighters, and this spaceship is right outside of a small planet known as Lapur, I believe is how you say it. And then a small escape pod jettisons from the lead spacecraft and heads towards the surface of that planet. Not unlike a very popular space movie that you might be thinking of or have heard of called Star Wars, because it's definitely a parody of Star Wars, and you will see what I mean as we go further in this book. Here on the surface of the planet, we can see that there are a bunch of children getting into a bunch of antics and fighting with each other, and one of them throws what is known as a snapping horple into a bubble pool, and these are all the children of Blood Wulf. In fact, this isn't even all of them. You can see that there are 6 right here, but he actually has a total of 9, and they're just acting up, and when the horple goes into the pool, it bites Blood Wulf. He gets really upset. We see this really cool full-page image of him just blowing up out of the water, and I'd like to point out, I actually really like the artwork of this book a lot. It's very colorful. It's very well done. I had never really had a lot of experience with Derek Gross Jr.'s art before, but using this book as its own example, I'm pretty impressed with it. But I should point out too, despite the fact that Blood Wulf is very much a not quite copy, but pretty close to a copy of Lobo, the comic also has some elements of Deadpool. Blood Wulf himself never actually breaks the fourth wall. However, his children do, and his kids are actually quite aware of the fact that they're in a comic book. On the next page, we can see that Blood Wulf is none too happy about being bit on the butt by the horple and how his bubble tub time was interrupted. He starts to yell at his kids. We see here the child who threw the Horple into the pool, and that child's mother tells Blood Wulf that he needs to calm down and that it wasn't done on purpose. And this is one of Blood Wulf's wives. He has 3.5. I say half because, as we can see here on the next page, one of his wives has 2 heads. And as far as I can tell, they are independently conscious from one another. But they do tend to finish each other's sentences. I don't know if they have any sort of mind link or whatnot. None of that is actually explained. Blood Wulf is upset that his hair looks bad from being soaking wet, and apparently he styles his hair by inserting one of his hands into an electrical outlet and just shocking the living crap out of himself, which makes his hair stand up. And we also just get a full back nude shot of Blood Wulf too, because, hey, why not? It's that kind of comic. We see Blood Wulf getting dressed on the next page here, and this is where we meet his, I guess, third wife, or I don't know. It doesn't say what order that he married any of them in, who is some kind of a bird alien. She points out that he forgot to tell her that he was about to shock himself to style his hair, and that it short-circuited the computer, which means that she lost 4 hours of work on the Merc reports because Blood Wulf is a mercenary and I guess just takes jobs from the highest bidder. It's not really explained in this book. He then explains to her that he's kind of going stir crazy being at home with the wives and the kids, and that he needs to engage in some senseless violence or he's going to explode, which is kind of a look into his psyche. He is a family man. He does love his wives and kids, but he also wants to be out, shooting guns and dodging bullets and, causing explosions and wreaking havoc all across the galaxy at the same time. And then on the next page, we see an advertisement for Nightmare, which is another Rob Liefeld property. I know I have at least the first issue of Nightmare. I don't know how many issues of that book were made. I don't think it was terribly successful, but at some point or another, I know I'll do a video on the first one at the very least. On the next page, we are outside of the home, and Blood Wulf is setting his morpher, which is apparently a training droid, to level 9 to really up his training game, which means that the morpher then morphs into a Creed, which is the race that Pitt is from in the book Pitt, which, if you'd like to know more about Pitt, check out my video on Pitt number 1. And I also like that it's another nod to a different Image book, which is always nice to see in these earlier issues of Image Comics. The Creed, of course, wastes no time in just smacking Blood Wulf straight through a tree. Blood Wulf retaliates by hitting the Creed with the tree like a baseball. And then we see him dive in through the air, at which point the Creed then smacks him straight into a mountain. He takes a huge hit. And all of his kids who were watching are now suddenly distracted by something off page. Blood Wulf is, of course, dazed by being smacked into the rocks. His kids are still distracted, and then suddenly the Creed, aka the Morpher, realizes that he's in trouble because the escape pod from the first page of the book has now crash landed directly on top of him and just blew the Morpher to bits, which Blood Wulf is really upset about because now he no longer has his Morpher, aka training droid, to work with, and he tells the people who did it that they better have a good reason. And here we see where the whole Star Wars A New Hope parody story comes in. We meet the 2 androids that have escaped from the ship that was chasing them. They come out. This is clearly a sort of C-3PO and a sort of R2-D2. And they're begging Blood Wulf not to beat them up because they were just trying to get away from people who were trying to destroy them in the first place. And then they happen to mention that they have a secret message, which Blood Wulf wants to see, and they don't want to show him, but he threatens them that he'll do worse to them than anything that the people who were chasing them could have done, and that they better show him the secret message if they know what's good for them. In an act of self-preservation, the droids decide to play the message for Blood Wulf, which, as we can see, is very much just a carbon copy of Princess Leia from A New Hope, and she's looking for the help of one Ogo Kanafi, which is just sort of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Blood Wulf starts to comment about how he thinks that the message is super boring, which the droids reply they already told him, and that the woman in the message is dressed very dull, and that his mother wouldn't even wear something so dull. But it turns out that the woman in the message is in fact his mom. So he quickly gears up, tells two of his wives here in the kitchen, I guess one and a half of his wives here in the kitchen. It's hard to tell when you're talking about someone who has two heads, that he doesn't know how long he's going to be gone for. Then he gives one of them a kiss goodbye while the second head is scolding the children for acting up in the kitchen. And here he says goodbye to his whole family as he gets onto his motorcycle along with the droids, and they're off to go find Ogo Kanofi. So we find out that the force that was chasing these droids across the galaxy is known as the Regime. And as Blood Wulf is flying through the air to go find Ogo Kanofi, the Regime intercepts and starts shooting at them with their little, I guess, sort of TIE fighters that kind of resemble the basic shape a little bit. The droids begin to freak out. Blood Wulf tells them there's nothing to worry about, but then they get hit and then they crash land in a swamp with a huge splash. And now they're potentially stranded on this alien world. However, lucky for them, they happen to crash land in a swamp, which was exactly where Ogo Kanofi was at. Because it helps to move the story along quicker. I should point out that the story gets kind of off the wall from this point forward. Not that it was, super normal to begin with. Ogo introduces himself, but there's no time to chat as the Regime starts to open fire on all of them. Blood Wulf tells them to run into the forest, that he'll hold off the Regime soldiers. He's shooting at all of them. He gets his gunshot out of his hand. He's running. He catches up to them. Ogo, for some unknown reason, kind of strips down into this weird pseudo He-Man costume. And then they run into the woods to try and escape the Regime soldiers, even deeper into the woods, but they run into another problem very quickly. The problem they ran into was that the trees that they were standing next to was actually the legs of this giant space monster dinosaur thing, which quickly proceeds to eat one of the droids, the R2-D2 type droid. However, that droid has something special planned for this dinosaur monster. As the Regime soldiers catch up, they're about to open fire and kill Blood Wulf, until suddenly there's a huge explosion that blows up the dinosaur monster's head, and we see the little fake R2-D2 running out of the explosion, and then the rest of the crew is just running for their lives, trying to get away. Unfortunately, they're stopped in their tracks by something that they didn't want to run into. On the next page, we see an advertisement for Supreme number 24, which, again, I do have Supreme comics. I'll get around to talking about those at some point in the future. This apparently was a turning point for the Supreme storyline. I don't know how many issues of Supreme I have. I probably have at least the first 10, but I'll have to go through my collection and see how far in I can get, because I know I definitely didn't read that far into the comic. And on the next page, we can see what stopped them in their tracks. It's this giant fake Godzilla with a big fin mohawk, which prompts Blood Wulf to say that's one savage dragon. Okay, admittedly, it's kind of goofy, but again, shout out to another Image book, which was nice to see. And however, they're kind of lucky in the fact that this fake Godzilla starts to eat the regime soldiers that were chasing them. And Ogo Kanofi seems to be the one who's the most upset by seeing this thing because he knows what this monster is and what they're possibly in store for. The crew decides to retreat the direction that they came from. However, they are cut off by more regime soldiers. And they run back towards the monster, who is eating the other regime soldiers. And now they're pinned down behind these rocks between laser fire and a giant fake Godzilla. And they're not certain how they're going to get out of it when Blood Wulf realizes that all they have to do is run through the legs of the fake Godzilla, which Ogo is not thrilled about and tells them that they need to be able to hold their breath. And as they run through the legs of said Godzilla, it proceeds to fart all over them because it's that kind of a comic. It's apparently terrible, as even the cyborg droid is really having a hard time dealing with it. However, they make it through. The monster is preoccupied with eating the regime soldiers, as we can see right here, and the gang is trying to escape by any means necessary. The crew makes it out of the forest and finds the regime's flying bodyboard things. I don't know exactly what they are, but they can fly and they can shoot lasers. Blood Wulf takes the initiative to quickly blow up the other skimboard things to make sure that the regime soldiers can't follow them if they do manage to survive the giant fake Godzilla attack. They quickly fly away. I guess they were on the same planet that Blood Wulf lives on the whole time. I don't know. It's weird. It kind of feels like maybe it's a different world, but perhaps it's not. Anyway, they make it back to Blood Wulf's home. Blood Wulf tells them to quickly get rid of the skiffs that they were on so that they can't be tracked, and that he wants to get out of here quickly so that the regime can't track any of the droids back to his home. The kids make a point to bring up how bad he smells. He tells them that he loves them too, and that they need to get the big motorcycle, which we see here on the next page. It's not entirely the same as the motorcycle we saw earlier in the comic, but it's pretty similar. It just holds more people. We see here the droids in the back along with Ogo, and they fly into space. Blood Wulf is kind of lost in his own thoughts. Unfortunately for Ogo, he's just wearing a fishbowl type of space helmet, but not a space suit. And that's because he was unaware that there was no protective cover or force field on top of Blood Wulf's motorcycle. And as we can see, the vacuum of space very quickly seems to be taking its effect on him and expanding his body bigger and bigger. And he's trying to get Blood Wulf's attention. Unfortunately, they have no comm units. He quickly smacks him on the back of the head to try and get him to stop. But unfortunately, it's too late, and Ogo's entire body just explodes into chunks throughout space. However, his head is okay because it was in the sealed helmet. Blood Wulf turns around to see just the floating head and is surprised that Ogo didn't have a force field to protect him from the pressures of the vacuums of space the way that he does. And he's also upset by the fact that now Ogo cannot help them to find the other people they need to save Blood Wulf's mom. However, the journey continues as they look for those people and decide what to do next in terms of how to go about saving his mom in the next issue. This is where the story ends, and honestly, it's not terribly offensive. I mean, again, it's a little cliche in points. The whole Star Wars parody thing had not been done to death in 95 the same way it has today. But, you know, as far as the feel of the story, it's not bad. You know, it's not anything mind-blowing or terrific, but it's decent. On the next page, we see an ad for Extreme Exclusive, which is for, I guess it was merchandise that you could get only on the Extreme Tour. So I suppose it was by Touring Extreme Studios. You see here t-shirts and hats, and there's a program with Badrock and Shaft on it. And, I guess this would have been cool swag to get at the time, but you would have had to have been, I guess, local or at least in the area of the Extreme Studios location if you were ever going to have a chance to get any of this stuff. Here we get a giant 2-page vertical ad. Thanks again, Rob. Love seeing those big vertical foldouts for Badrock's solo comic, which I guess launched in 95. I knew he had a solo book, but I didn't remember it launching in 95. I thought it was later on than that. But, it's a pretty decent image. This is a Rob Liefeld pinup, which is kind of cool. You can actually see that Rob made some strides in his artistic ability between, the books that he was putting out in 1992 versus the books he was putting out in 95. He had been drawing a lot more. Again, Rob still has his challenges when it comes to trying to draw realistic anatomies in certain areas, but overall, this is a pretty cool image. I actually kind of like it a bit. Here on the next page, we get a 2-page ad for Extreme Sacrifice, which I guess was a crossover event between multiple Extreme Studios books. We see here it involves Supreme, Bloodstrike, Shaft, I guess all of Youngblood, or maybe just Shaft, I don't know, and Prophet. I really don't recall this crossover event or having any of these books. It's possible I might have one or two lying around. I'll have to really dig through my collection to see. If not, I might try and see if I can dig some up in a back issue box in a comic book store at some time. I wouldn't mind actually knowing what this crossover was about and, how many issues it was. It seems like it might be neat. Here on the next page, we get an ad for New Men. I completely forgot about New Men. I might have one or two issues of New Men, but I know I never made a point to collect a lot of them. I'll have to dig through my collection to see if I have any, and if I do have New Men #1, I'll make a video about it at some point or another, I suppose. And on the reverse inside cover, we get a cutout mail-in form for the 1994 Fan Awards. And I'm shocked at the way this works. I guess it happened at Chicago Comic-Con, but if you'll notice here, it's not as if you're picking from a pre-selected group on any of these categories. You're literally just writing in whatever you want for, who's your favorite colorist? Seriously? Of all the colorists, who's your favorite? Just pick one. We don't care. What's your favorite comic book? Which, out of all of them? Out of every comic book in existence, I can't imagine what a nightmare it must have been for the people who had to try and tally up these votes to be going through and then just suddenly get a vote for some random writer or some random character and have to be like, okay, one for this person or one for this book out of the however many thousands of entries they might have gotten. That must have been horrible. And that was Blood Wulf #1. Again, it wasn't a terribly successful character, but after reading it for this video, and I had honestly probably never read this book before. I think I got it by buying someone else's collection. Blood Wulf was never a character that really appealed to me. I can honestly say, while having not been very successful of a title, it's not as if it's offensively bad in any way. I mean, yes, Blood Wulf is a copy of Lobo, but the story is engaging and fun. There's nothing necessarily that stands out as just being god-awful about it. And it even has, a little bit of seasonings of Deadpool in a way, with the breaking of the fourth wall and some of the way that the humor reads in the story. I understand why it failed ultimately, but at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily one of those disaster books that should have never happened to begin with. But, those are just my opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please take time to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.